Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome back to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. With an impressive client portfolio including Mercedes-Benz, Moët Hennessy and more, my guest today crafts unforgettable brand experiences. Gabriel Ornelas is a seasoned strategist in hospitality, food and lifestyle and host of On the Pass, another top 100 podcast featuring industry leaders in food and beverages. The way Gabriel embodies the essence of hospitality by putting others before himself, I think is one of the keys to his success and comes across in the way he talks about his guests. Something else that resonated with me was how he looks at brands as communities, and I've named the episode for that reason. I'm actually really excited to share this interview with another podcaster in such a similar space, so I hope that you enjoy the interview as much as I did. Hello and welcome to the show, Gabriel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program today. I usually crack straight into the episode with a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. But I'm actually just going to ask you a little bit more about you because you've got a really interesting show. Can you tell listeners, I've just described it in the intro, but something that they mightn't have heard about your program?
Yeah, absolutely. I created and host a podcast called On the Pass. And my goal is to really celebrate the entire hospitality ecosystem. And so what that composes of is a lot of conversations with individuals across the industry. It takes a village to run a restaurant. It takes a village to operate a hotel. It takes a village to develop out in a wine business or a spirits business. And so I talk to the heads of a lot of these brilliant companies and really dig into who they are, what they're doing, why it's meaningful, and try to provide value and a resource while also, I think similar to you, making it fun. There's so many shows in our ecosystem that, for me, fall flat because it's not fun. It's not maybe as interesting. And so for me, I'm always trying to infuse a little bit of my personality, a little bit of my energy into this show. The show is not about me, and it's never been about me. It's always about the guest. The spotlight is on the guest. But as you know, as the host of a show, you sort of guide the energy of the show, and you guide the questions, and you guide where things go. And so much of what I'm doing is really to bring out the human element of a well-known winemaker or an internationally recognized chef or a CEO of a hospitality brand, and not just have them give the business touch points of why the business is doing well or why it's succeeding or what's their unique lens. All of that is important, but I want to get to the heart of who they are. Why do they do what they do? Why do they choose to wake up every morning and do this business? How are they affecting people's lives? The lives of their employees, the lives of their customers. And then I love to just extract knowledge from a business perspective, but also at the end of every episode, I ask, what's a life lesson you can leave us with? And it's a very broad question, but we get the most interesting answers. James, you've probably heard a few of them, but then I've done several episodes where we just extract those life lessons. So I call it Life Lessons from the Best in Hospitality. And we've got the former CEO of Bacardi, or Carlos Couturier, who's the president and managing director of Grupo Habitat, the boutique hoteliers of Mexico, and Manu Bufada, Latin America's 50 best chef from Curitiba, Brazil, saying some of the greatest lessons that they've learned in life. But for me, I want to provide value and I want to be a resource for people in the industry. But I also want people outside of the industry to listen to Steve Schwartz, the CEO of Art of Tea, and his beautiful story about creating a tea company over 20 years, but it all came and stemmed from the loss of his mother of cancer and then his interest in getting into Ayurvedic medicine and what he's learned as a business owner. I go back and listen to some of these episodes, or we re-edit them and re-release them. And I'm always happy that even somebody outside of the industry, someone just as a business person, can get value and extract knowledge and something interesting from each of these episodes. And that's my goal. My goal always, is there a potential unique takeaway? And so that's the hope always, is that we change someone's perception, or we make them think differently, or they learn something new, or they implement something that they've listened to into their lives. That's the hope. That's the dream. And I think, as you're doing as well, we do that one episode at a time.
Absolutely. It's so nice to speak with you. Every time we've hopped on a call, this is the only one that's been recorded, so other people get to hear our amazing chat this time. But every single point you make is exactly why I run Hospopreneurs. Every single point you made there, and listeners will hear that and go, oh my God, James, you found another podcaster on the other side of the world who talks about the same things, they're interested in the same things. It's unbelievable that we have met. So I just had to have you on the program. And the reason that I didn't start with the normal crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience is my broad beginning question, opening question of the show, is because you interview people who talk about hospitality all day, every day. You will have heard some exceptional stories, crazy stories. You'll have your own, you'll have some from guests. But I really wanted to actually hone in on that. And you've sort of answered it indirectly, but it was a point that you made in your explanation there around why we do what we do. And that's really what drives us to run these programs, to interview the people we interview, and more fundamentally, like you described, putting the spotlight on the guests to understand what drives them. So every episode I ask why you do what you do. If you feel like you haven't answered it already in your answer there, I'd like to hear just a little bit more.
I'm happy to expand a little bit. I always say to people, I'm in the people business first and foremost because I love people. I grew up in a family who comes from immigrants who are very, very hospitable and people that love to take care of people. And I said in an article recently, a couple months ago, that I said, I think my father was a public servant. My mother worked in healthcare. And as their only son, I was uniquely positioned to be in the hospitality industry because I just have a deep love for bringing joy to people. And we have to remember that outside of the fancy awards and the brilliant concepts or the avant-garde concepts that are created, we're simply in the business of making people happy. And I had Shep Gordon on the episode, the man that's coined as creating the celebrity chef. And he said Roger Verger oftentimes would say that we need to remind ourselves that we're simply in the business of making people happy. And so that's sort of a North Star for me continuously. But why I ultimately decided to create a show and record it and get the equipment, that's a different thing because I was fortunate enough I've been working with brands for almost 15 years in the hospitality, wine and spirit space, travel brands, traveling all over the world. And through a lot of those projects, got to sit down and meet some of the most interesting people in the world. And a lot of them were chefs or restaurateurs or hoteliers or artists or, wine and spirits executives or recovering lawyers that decided to open up a boutique hotel somewhere in Italy. And we just had the most incredible conversations, of course, over food and over wine. And as we traveled, and I finally got to a point in 2019 where I said, I need to create a show out of this. I'm uniquely positioned with all the access that I have to these incredible people. And I think they'll want to be on the show. And so that's ultimately how it happened. It was just, I woke up one day going, I need to do this. And I'm so glad I did because I've said this many times. And I think many hosts of shows, this would resonate with this and you would as well. We get the most out of this, James. We get to sit down. We get to talk with interesting people. We get to develop friendships with them. We potentially get to travel with them at some point. And we get this first one-on-one interaction where we get to learn from them. And then ultimately we package it in a way that hopefully, if we did our job well, other people get to enjoy and learn from and share. But first and foremost, we get the most out of it. And I didn't do this for selfish reasons. I did it really because I wanted to give back to an industry that has given so much to me and has made my life rich beyond measure.
And that does, like you described there, that does resonate with me, and it will resonate with a lot of hosts. If there's anyone out there listening who's a host of their own podcast too. I started the show purely out of curiosity, and listeners can go back if they really want to episode 1, the very first episode, and hear that.
They can hear the progress, James.
Oh, yeah.
They can hear how far you've come.
Oh, let me tell you, it's a long way. So, but it has changed a lot over the years. But my initial motivation was purely out of curiosity. I just wanted to learn. And I thought maybe other people would enjoy learning like I do. And that's refined a lot over a long period of time now, 6 years on. And like you described, get to share that with other people. We can package that up in a way that hopefully adds value for other people to absorb as well. But there are some amazing things that I learn from guests, not just during the interview, but in and around it. And I know that that will make sense to you. You get to meet a lot of people and spend time with them. And then the interview itself is 30 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour and a half of recording. And then you just package that up. But you might have spent, day or days or a week, depending on where you're going with some individuals. And
that's correct.
There's so much that just doesn't make it on, that you're just trying to distill the essence of what it is and put it out there. And so I guess if nothing else, for listeners out there hearing this interview, and if they're coming in for the first time, hearing an interview with an amazing host such as yourself, and should definitely be checking out your podcast. It gives a bit of insight into me on this show as the host of this program. So I'm really excited to learn more over this interview about your mentality, your philosophy, your mindset, and the way that you host your program and interact with your guests, other than what I can hear from listening to your show. So yeah, I really appreciate you joining me on this program.
Definitely. Well, I'll just add to what you were saying. You're right. There's so much that goes into an interview that the listener has no idea about. But I think it comes down to the art of the conversation. And ultimately, any good host, part of the job of being a host is really to do their due diligence and really try to understand their guest, but also really understand their audience as well. Because on a different show, the guest could sound slightly different. So for me, I'm constantly thinking about my audience, but I'm also thinking about what's interesting for me as well, because I'm one of the listeners also. I'm someone who wants to learn from these individuals. And so I try to really do a deep dive into who they are. I read a lot of articles about them. I may listen to them on other shows. I'll watch them on YouTube, but I'm not just listening to what they're saying. I'm listening to how they say what they say as well, and the cadence of their voice, and where they potentially maybe get stuck, or if there are things that's really interesting in articles or other programs, but I'd love to learn more. I'd love to go deeper, or how can my show potentially expose them in a slightly different way? How can we create a memorable moment for them and for myself? And I always say, my goal always is, obviously, I mentioned earlier, for there to be great takeaways for the audience, but for the guest, I want them to be most proud of our episode together. When someone says, hey, send me over a podcast that you've done, I want them to send my episode I did with them. We don't always hit the mark, but we aim for that always.
You mentioned that you were learning things. I'd like to unpack that a little bit more and try to understand what it is that you're learning about at the moment, what it is that you're exploring, and where your attention or your focus is.
As I said, part of the goal is to celebrate the ecosystem. And so, again, within this ecosystem, there's a lot of players. There's a lot of contributors. There's front of house. There's back of house. There's wine and spirits companies. We're heading into a space where there's a lot of money flowing into ag tech. This ecosystem is growing and growing like crazy. And so I'm constantly trying to provide my listeners with amazing people. And I didn't just want to do a show about chefs. I love chefs. But again, I wanted to do a show that really celebrated a lot of different people. And so for me, the constant learning is how things are evolving. Like in the food tech space, in the ag tech space, looking at how are people innovating in hospitality, in the restaurant industry, where margins are razor thin and having any type of profitability sometimes is the biggest challenge. And you don't get into this business as a restaurateur or a hotelier. On the tech side, that's different. But as a restaurateur or hotelier and say, I'm getting in this business to get rich. You get in this business because you're passionate about it. You get into this business because you have some sort of maybe family connection, or you have a love for service, or you love to create, and your medium of creation is through food or is through unique, memorable experiences. So you have a lot of deeply passionate, creative people who come into businesses where it's quite challenging to operate these businesses. They're not only capital intensive, but human capital is the most important component of this, and finding and aligning with the right people is integral for success, but also figuring out, how do we make any money like doing this outside of just covering our expenses, and overheads are out of control, and cutting costs while also maintaining, quote unquote, your authentic product or service, and while not cutting corners, but also trying to cut costs. These are very challenging, complicated sort of businesses sometimes, but the learning is in really trying to understand as much as possible the entire ecosystem. And I feel like there's so many sectors of this business that I'm not an expert in, but I'm dangerous speaking about several of them because I've taken the time to really learn about a guest, learn about their specific field, and try to really understand what are their pain points and what does success look like.
I know exactly what you mean when you say you're dangerous. You've explored every facet or so many facets of this industry, because I started the show to cross-pollinate information across various parts of food and bev. And that is precisely the way to describe it, because you and I explore all sorts of different areas of food and beverages, not just chefs, not just retail, not just agriculture. It's so many aspects of what makes successful businesses in this space. And ultimately, we're trying to understand the mentalities, the philosophies of the people behind those businesses and what makes them successful. So that absolutely resonates with me, your answer there. You mentioned in your answer something about creativity, which is a topic that I like to focus a little bit on the program. You said that ultimately these are creative people. I'd like to try to understand more from your perspective, because you've interviewed a lot of successful creative people who've then, and successful in business, being able to apply their creativity. How would you define that creativity in a bit more detail? And then how do you think they flex that muscle and train it to become something that they can utilize?
I think it depends on who the guest is. I just did an episode, which I love, which I would encourage some of your listeners to listen to, an episode with Fawn Weaver, the founder and CEO of Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, which she just recently announced that they're going to be doing a cognac brand as well. But Fawn's story is so interesting, and she is obviously an incredible business person, but she's obviously wildly creative as well in how she attacks business, how she hires, how she aligns with the right partners, but also she's so resilient as well. And I think there needs to be tip of the cap, so to speak, to founders and entrepreneurs who you get into this business knowing there's going to be challenges and knowing that there's going to be tough roads ahead. But she's been able to navigate with such grace in a lot of ways. And I think that emotional resilience is pretty incredible in a lot of ways. And I think creative people can get also fixated on certain things and your love for the way things should be done or the way things should come to life. But you also have to really be flexible as well. And so I think as a creative business person, I think she has a deep understanding of self. She understands herself very well, and therefore she can navigate life and other people with ease in a lot of ways. And starting out as a PR person and an events person and then being a writer to then becoming arguably one of the most important female spirits executives in a very short period of time. It's astonishing. It's absolutely, not only is the story brilliant of Uncle Nearest, I think the story is still being written about her. And there's going to be many stories told in the years to come and the decades to come about this individual who created a very important brand in a space that is male dominated, that is white male dominated, and to have a Black female entrepreneur, rock star, creative executive just break barriers the way she has, it's a story worth following and it's a story worth listening to.
You can hear in the way that you speak, and if listeners haven't already picked up on this, I'm going to make the point super, super clear if they haven't already, but you can see how passionate you are about the people that you put in the spotlight. I'd love to hear more about you in that answer with creativity as well. And listeners should definitely check out that latest episode. It's actually the second latest episode, I think, that's released.
Fawn Weaver was episode 69 that I released like a month and a half ago.
69. Great. So listeners should definitely go and check out that episode. I'd love to hear more around your focus in creative pursuits. Pull out a little bit more, because inherently what you do with On the Pass is creative as well. And the work that you do with brands, I'd like to open that up a bit more. Your perspective on creativity, your process, your creative process, the steps that you take to ultimately create something.
Yeah, thank you. Creating the show On the Pass, it's been so fun, man. And to see how it started to where it is now, and similar to you, if listeners go back to episode 1, you see the growth, you see the development. I didn't come in to this space as a seasoned journalist who also is on camera or recording all the time. I came in just passionate about the space, passionate about people, but also I said in an article, I'm sure you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. Before I started the show, I feel like I put my 10,000 hours into communicating with people, being passionate about learning about people, and just being genuinely, authentically interested in what's going on in people's lives, and also from the business side of things. And so from starting the show to acquiring the equipment, to thinking about logos, to also just thinking about like a sonic signature, all the music that's in both my On the Pass episodes and the Hotspot episodes where we highlight emerging talent, all the music is original. All the music was co-created by me and my partner, Dylan Agajanian. He would send me an iteration and I would go, I really like that, but I think we're missing this. Or I really love that we did a bit of a Spanish guitar in this, but maybe we can add a little bit of this. And so the creation of, the genesis of the overall show, there's a lot of components that go into it. And that's before you even get to interviewing someone. But we really thought about all of that. We were thinking about like, how do we show up? Is the name going to be memorable? Is the music going to be memorable? Is it going to be shareable? And with not a tremendous amount of budget, I think I'm very proud of what we've been able to create. But that process has been so fun for me. But I was doing that a lot with brands. In that case, when you're doing it for someone else, it's almost easier, James, when you do it for someone else. Obviously, there's more budget to play with, but it's not even about that. It's the fact that it's not as personal. It's not as close to home, and you can step outside of yourself and go, okay, I'm working with X tequila brand and I'm creating this campaign where they want to focus more on the culinary industry, chefs. And, you can start architecting what that looks like, how that narrative shows up through storytelling, through digital content, through experiences. But you have to do those same exercises when it comes to your own creative pursuits. And so I wouldn't say we were as process driven, but there was workshopping, there was a lot of brainstorming, there's a lot of Google Docs and a lot of notepads of what ultimately, how do we make a show that we're proud of? And that's been my goal, is I want to be proud of the content that I'm putting out. And like I said, I want the guests to be proud of it. So I didn't quite approach this show as a project like I would with a client, but it was a very personal project that I did use some of that same sort of brand strategy architecture into the components because, and I'm sure listeners can hopefully appreciate, is it's more than just recording something with a guest and then putting it out there in the world. There's so much research that goes into it. There are multiple conversations, as you said. Sometimes there's lunches, sometimes there's dinners, sometimes there's months that go by before you can schedule a recording date. And in addition to you're creating a podcast, you're creating and developing a relationship with this person, which hopefully lives beyond this physical audio visual project episode. It lives beyond that. And I've been saying to a lot of people that we've all been to a dinner with a prospective client or with a business partner, and it's great. You're like, I love this person. I love their energy. I think they're great. I would love to work with them. There's something different about doing a podcast episode or any type of audio visual project with someone. It bonds you in a different way. And I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it does.
But for me, there's a deeper sort of connection. There's something more interesting about getting to know that person and you wanting to get to know you. And again, if you hopefully you successfully create something that you're both excited about, that's a relationship that lives beyond that particular episode.
Yeah. Gabriel, have you ever performed in a stage play?
Never.
Never?
No.
So I have, like super amateur in high school, way, way back. But your answer there resonates and it actually made me think about that, because a podcast episode, we curate this performance together. It's something that we're doing this thing, we're curating it, we're publishing it, and we have this sort of shared experience of the process of publishing it. And that's what you have with a guest every time. And that's sort of what landed for me, but you might interpret that in a very different way. But it's interesting hearing your answer there in that it is different. You develop this unique relationship with every guest over a long period of time. Like what listeners probably don't know, I'm sure you'll have a similar experience to me, Gabriel, but we get pitched regularly to have people on the show from PR companies or brands will pitch us. And we just have to say no to so many that the people that we ultimately choose are people that we've done exactly that. We've chosen and foster that relationship, sometimes over a really long period of time, to then go, you know what, let's do an episode together. So that answer there, and all of them so far, all of your answers really land with me. Gabriel, in building on the past, you create this community of people, of not just guests, but all these listeners as well. And I know that fostering communities and building communities is something that you're really passionate about. Can you talk me through your interest in what that term means to you and your interest in building communities?
Thank you for bringing that up. I think at a fundamental level, we're all tribal people coming from like the hunter-gatherer days, and we need each other. It's so important, even with the advent of technology and hyper-connectedness, we need each other. We need community. We need family. And it's so evident now more than ever, especially with people in our industry and outside of our industry dealing with mental health issues, all kinds of things that are affecting our development and our progress through life. And so for me, like I'm so deeply passionate about community building because it's what I want ultimately. I want to feel a part of something and I want people to feel a part of something. And so in the little way that we've done it with my show, we're constantly creating opportunities for not only an episode for people to learn new things and challenge the way they think and hopefully have great takeaways, but now more than ever, especially outside of COVID, opportunities to connect with our guests, to develop unique, memorable experiences with our guests and with our community members. And so I've been doing a series at my house. It's a culinary series called Casa Ornelas. And I've hosted 5 chefs over the last several months and have brought in people from the industry, listeners of the show, other guests of the show, and have really developed a space for us to support each other, to obviously have a good time and experience something quite unique. The uniqueness of a dinner party and a private dining experience, I think, is always something that lends itself to a really fun and memorable moment in our lives. But I've been trying to create moments for my guests, for my audience, for some of my clients to connect and support each other. And so community is just something that I continue to talk about. And someone had asked me a question. This was probably about 6 months ago. There was an article that they had asked me, what's the common thread between all of your guests? And I've said this on other shows before, but I said, it's all about community. Whether you're a wine business, whether you're a spirit, whether you're a hotel brand, whether you're a chef, you're all trying to develop community around your particular craft, product, or service. And everyone goes about it in a different way. That's something that really stood out to me, that I was like, wow, yeah, they're all storytelling and creating experiences and releasing incredible products. But again, your product, without your community, without your audience, without the people who want to engage with your product or service, it's just a great product or service. That's it. It doesn't really become the culture-changing brand without the community component. And so I think we lost so much of that during the pandemic. We're getting so much of it back, but I'm constantly trying to create spaces and opportunities for great minds, great people, great creatives, great entrepreneurs to come together, to support each other, to learn from each other. It's really like the physical representation of On the Pass, but not just with me and a guest, but with me and multiple guests. And yet then everyone gets to chime in and everyone gets to learn from each other and everyone gets to benefit. And so I'm constantly urging my clients that I work with to let's create opportunities that we're proud of. Let's create moments that we learn from, and let's create more community through this beautiful hospitality ecosystem that we live in. We get to work with the best people and we get to taste the best wine and we get to learn from brilliant creatives who are changing food culture, are changing hospitality culture, are changing the way we move through the world. And it needs to be celebrated, but we also need to remember that without each other, it doesn't mean as much.
I love that answer. And thank you for explaining in a lot more detail what the word community and community building really means to you and why it is something that you're so passionate about. It makes complete sense hearing you explain it like that. And in part of your answer there really resonates with me personally. About 8 years ago, 2015, 8 years ago, I started running this regular kind of group of people who would just talk about philosophy, business, science, literally anything. And that to me was part of what really sparked me to start Hospopreneurs in that time. I don't even know if I mentioned it in that very first episode, but I used to catch up with these people every week and we'd talk about literally anything. I called it the knowledge exchange. And it was just people who liked talking about ideas. It wasn't necessarily about the execution, however, because for me, I like playing with those ideas, getting into that creative space. Your community that you're fostering physically, is there an objective? Is it just to discuss things? Is it just to meet people? Do you have a purpose behind that other than feeling this sense of belonging or being part of that community?
It's a good question. I think there are many components of why I bring people together and why I think it's important to bring people together. I think first and foremost, at a foundational level, it is that being seen, being heard, feeling a part of something bigger than the self. I think that is really important. And we forget, like, there are small moments in our life that can change our lives in very profound ways. So you never know what someone is going through. You never know what someone is struggling with. And being invited to a dinner or feeling a part of something, these aren't feelings that are for people who, very successful people oftentimes feel lonely. It's something that plagues all of us at times. And so I have an array of colleagues and friends and business friends that want to feel a part of something bigger than just themselves. And oftentimes they get that at work, but some of them don't necessarily. So first and foremost, it's being a part of something. Secondly, it's how do we support each other? How do we support each other in business? How do we support each other in life? How do we create long-lasting connections? Not something, what have you done for me? Or what can you do for me? It's really going in with the spirit of, we're going to be friends for a very long time. We're going to be colleagues for a long time. So let's ride this wave together. And so there's that component. And then obviously there's brands that want to be involved in this and are sponsoring these events and who want to be engaged with this community. Again, it's the quintessential experience by few, seen by many. At the ones that I'm doing, it's 15, 20 people, but a lot of them are quite influential. And the content that comes out of it is magical in a lot of ways. To get a bird's eye view of an intimate dining experience with a very talented chef and decision makers, let's call them decision makers, in around and adjacent to the industry. It's something that brands and audiences want to know about. And I do this in a larger scale with brand clients, but for my own, I just try to hit those components where it's foundationally you're a part of something. There's learning, there's education, there's potentially deep friendships that come from it, but also there's a business case for it as well. And there's great content and there's opportunities to collaborate. I think I'm constantly trying to create moments for people to come together. And I had one of the last dinners I did, there was a gentleman who invests a lot in consumer-facing brands, has done a lot in the spirit space. There was a young founder of a non-alcoholic spirit brand, and she was like, oh my gosh, it was so amazing that he was there. And I was, well, yeah, I planned that. Like in my head, I'm like, that was well thought out. That's a very sort of simple example, but it runs the gamut, obviously, of studio producers who want to meet young culinary talents or casting for a show. So I'm constantly creating a space for people to meet and hopefully build deeper connections that, again, extend outside of that moment.
The words that I use are summarized by the word legacy in my vernacular. I truly believe that every individual seeks to leave something in the world. That's why we ultimately do a lot of the things that we do. Now, this is my own philosophy on it, so people will believe very different things. But that's what I see as the common denominator, that people are trying to outlive themselves in the physical form that they're in. And so we will contribute in various ways to something larger than ourselves, whether that's through religion, art, through business, if you plant a tree or have a child, or there's all sorts of ways that we can create great food being artwork in itself, right? To make it a bit more tangible and related to the topic, right? I summarize that through the word legacy. So that really lands with me. So I appreciate you sharing your insights, your experiences, and your process in a very small way, learning about how you do things. I recognize that we're getting to the end of the episode. It's been an amazing episode. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I've only got a few questions to go. I'd like to understand what your area of friction, your biggest challenge is the interpretation of the question. I'm looking for where is giving you friction at the moment in your life, in your work that you're dealing with?
The only friction is myself. The only sort of barrier is the limited belief that creeps into the mind. I think positive self-talk is so important, but also not just being fake about it, but really believing in that internal narrative. And so what I would say is over the course of, in the challenges that I've gone through in the last year, has really just been in redefining myself, stepping into my confidence, stepping into the person that I'm meant to be. You asked a big question, so I'm giving a big answer that may not have the specifics that you like, but I don't get upset about deals that fall through. I don't see that as friction. I don't see that as really challenging. That's part of the course of being an entrepreneur and a small business owner. I think the biggest challenge is just stepping into the person that I'm meant to be and this role that I'm meant to play in my life, in my family's life, in my friends' lives, in my colleagues' life. And so I have a lot of big ideas. I have a lot of big dreams. I also know that as a community builder, I have a big responsibility as well. Most people say, oh, I met through Gabriel, or oh, I got that opportunity because I met someone. There's a responsibility that I have to obviously continue to do that, but also to check in on myself and to make sure that I'm developing appropriately and also make sure that I'm filling my cup. Because as someone who is a giver and as someone who loves to bring people together and loves to be very hospitable and in service of others, I also have to remember to be in service of myself. And that is not being selfish. Being selfish is not a negative thing. Being selfish with your time and understanding that you need to fill your cup and take care of yourself so then you can show up in other people's lives so much more dynamic, so much more impactful.
My own question for myself, daily question that I have now, came up recently around exactly the same thing. Because as someone who likes to give, and I think this will resonate with anyone who's been in the service industry, is you're wanting to give times before you learn how to navigate this. If you're fortunate enough not to have this problem, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But obviously you have recognized that within yourself, and I recognize that within myself. So the question that I ask is, how can I give more effectively? And for me, that question allows me to create this bit of a loop between, okay, how am I giving? What am I giving? How much can I give? But then recognizing that I can't give without filling my cup too. You can't pour from an empty cup is the saying, right? And so that allows me that feedback to just continue to ask that question. Is my cup full enough that I can give more? And how can I give more with less as well? As how can I maximize the amount that I'm giving? So that absolutely lands. Gabriel, it's been an amazing conversation with you today. There are so many things that I want to talk about with you. I know we could talk for hours. I'd love to, but we have to let these beautiful people go and do things with their days as well. Gabriel, I have one last question for you on the program today, and that's, who would you like to hear on the show?
Oh man, there's so many great people. There's so many incredible individuals that are doing mind-blowing things in our space. Someone that comes to mind that's a near and dear friend of mine is Jamila Robinson, who just got named as the new editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit magazine, helping really craft the future for that brand and architect how that publication, that media entity goes into the next several years, the next 5 years. I think she would be somebody really incredible to potentially dive into, who's worked across numerous media organizations, who's a food media leader, and much like we talked about earlier, can talk and wax poetic across numerous different elements of the industry, and is just a really dynamic speaker as well.
Beautiful. I'd love to chat with her, but I've really enjoyed chatting with you, Gabriel. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Awesome, man. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.